All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Brockbeard from NASCAR.info, checking in again after a very busy day in the old NASCAR news cycle right now. Just catching up on all of that after all the updates from earlier today. So let's jump right into it. All right. Gosh, where to start? Well, how about we start at the opening of the season for next year in 2021? Barely do we have SpeedWeeks already in the books, and now we already are going to have a completely revamped SpeedWeeks lineup, compressing everything into just a matter of 1 week, rather. Or if they're even going to call it SpeedWeeks anymore, even though that's the all-inclusive term, including the 24-hour race. Yeah, gonna be a real interesting kind of deal about how all that's gonna shake out. Just starting off, I gotta say, from from the standpoint of actually attending the events or like trying to have like the fewest possible days to actually stay out there and cover the event, I think it's a great idea, quite honestly. I think the biggest change that we've had really, in Speed Weeks that has made it seem like it's way too long for what it is just the big reductions in the amount of practice time that the Cup Series guys have. I've heard some complaints about this from some of the drivers at other tracks during the season, but it's especially significant over at Daytona, given that, of course, it's the first race of the season. And, they need as much time as possible to get used to new teams and everything like that. That's the one drawback with this. I don't see that really improving too much by cramming it all together. But the one advantage is that maybe it's more cost efficient to cram it all in there. What we did have originally is we used to have basically a Wednesday practice, among other sessions. I mean, you go even further back, look at like the videos that NASCAR Man and I did on the 1994 Speed Weeks, or even further back to 88. You would have so many other support events and so much other practice that was happening along the way. It's just a very different deal now. But when you've had something even like just this past year, where you don't have the Wednesday practice anymore, and now you have just several days that are open. You basically have like the ARCA race and Cup Series qualifying, and then nothing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and most of Thursday, going right into the duels on Thursday. I think this was perhaps something that was inevitably going to happen at the end of the day. I think that was a good decision there to get that all brought together. I know for me personally, if I'm planning out a week of covering as many events as possible, compressing as many of them as possible into as few days as possible is certainly attractive to me. I know that was a big stumbling block in looking to plan on doing that this year, but maybe next year or in the maybe in the more not too distant future, that could perhaps be possible. On top of that, of course, the one big change with the Speed Weeks itself, talking about the infield road course race for the Busch Clash. Very excited about that. I know that it may seem, completely different from what we've seen in the Busch Clash from before, but if it's an exhibition race and it's meant to be just for fun and all that, I think that, you may as well just run it on the infield road course. I think the Clash has gotten too far away from what it was originally intended to be. If we're going to have a quick sprint race among pole winners, I mean, you look at the inaugural race back in 1979, you had like 10 cars in the field. It was like a 25 lap sprint, no stages, no any of that. And you just had a very straightforward event. It makes more sense to have something that is just, completely separate and divorced from, what happens in the Daytona 500 and the other events later in the week. And let's just add another element in there to make it more interesting. I think the latest format that we've had, where you have like a 75 lap race, where you have upwards of 20 cars in the field, where it's no longer just pole sitters. You got past Daytona winners, you got playoff drivers, you have all these other things. I think it's encouraging as maybe a way to possibly clear out some of those gimmicks. And just, I know that running on the infield road course is certainly a gimmick in its own right, but at least it's a gimmick that perhaps could be more intriguing. I think that certainly the success of the infield road course at Charlotte, it's perhaps another proving ground to see about doing some more infield road course races, maybe at other venues. But I think I'm encouraged also that NASCAR is choosing to do this for an exhibition race and not for a points race yet. So the Roval is still special enough in its place, not only as a regular season event, but also as a playoff event as well. So I think that's a good deal there for them, and be very interested to see what happens on that, as I'm sure everybody is. What we also have with that is we have a situation where they're going to be running the old cars again, that they're not going to be running the next gen cars at Daytona. This, I think, is very interesting given what I had heard from at least one crew chief from a Ford team back at Fontana last week, that the timeline for the next gen car is spaced out really far. I know that William Byron had the test at Fontana just these past couple of days, but you also have a situation where the Ford teams, maybe the other manufacturers, aren't getting that heads up about the same time. For the Ford teams, they weren't expecting to actually run the next gen car until August, and that's quite a ways through the season. I mean, we're going to have the schedule by then. We're going to have the other manufacturers perhaps get a head start, unless there's something that's gumming up the works with all of the next gen cars for that matter. But that's awfully late in the year. I mean, you got to start building cars and getting your fleet up to spec. And so I'm wondering if this deal with running the Busch Clash as just an exhibition race with the old cars, if that's an admission that maybe we're going to have something like back in 2007 when they were phasing in the car of tomorrow, but they didn't make it mandatory right from the start of the year. In fact, the first race for the car of tomorrow in 2007 was the Spring Bristol race. And originally the plan was back then, if I remember the numbers correctly, that they were going to do 16 races out of the 36 races with the car tomorrow, the rest with the old, I guess it was the Gen 4 car now, then doing 26 races in 2008, and then the full 36 race season by 2009. That ultimately got fast-tracked so that by 2008 they were running it the full season, and you had that deal there. I'm not sure if we're going to be heading towards that same situation. It's certainly one thing that's possible. The other thing I think is going to be really unusual is that if we're changing the car up to that degree where you are not going to be running, you're going to be running the rims with the single lug stud and everything like that, and all that infrastructure built up around the next gen car, where does that leave running the old cars in the Busch Clash? I think that's really going to be the question. Are they going to mandate that they change the lug studs on there and run the one lug stud? I guess that's possible. I'm not sure if that's the case, or are they going to be able to still run the 5 lug design there on the cars, the older cars for the Clash? It's an exhibition race, so ultimately it doesn't really matter too much, I suppose. But I imagine that's going to be an adjustment, certainly for the pit crews. If they're going to, I'm sure they're going to spend the entire off season, if they haven't already started already, trying to practice doing one lug stops and get ready for all of that. But are they going to have one more race where they still do 5 lugs? I don't know enough about the mechanical aspect to know if it's possible that they could run the tires and the rims from the next gen car on the previous gen car. That's the biggest wrinkle in the Clash that I think that's going to be really interesting. And then, of course, you have to factor in running it on the infield road course, and that being a whole other deal there. Gosh, I mean, that's going to be really unusual. I'm sure the details will be worked out well before then, if they haven't already, just from what I'm hearing already on the initial reports about what's going to happen there at the Clash. But really, I think it's going to be a good change. I think having the events spaced out in such a way where you have these in just an order, where you have each day has some kind of an event, whether it's you got ARCA paired up with the Xfinity Series race on Saturday. That's cool for those guys. That's going to get them more exposure. Perhaps something that was a more long-term plan when NASCAR acquired ARCA. You're going to have qualifying on its own day in the middle of the week. That's a good deal there. You're going to have the Clash to kick. I mean, the Clash is still in its proper spot of kicking things off and being just an appetizer to lead into everything else. I like that each day has an event. I think that's really fair for people that are out there as ticket holders. And, imagine, I mean, I know again, and I this is just my own experience, thinking about covering the events there, I figured, okay, well, we probably forego doing the Clash and qualifying and then come in for the duel, since that's Thursday night. And the most cost-effective way would be to do Thursday through Sunday. Now, with this format, I could certainly change that up. And if the possibility ever exists of covering Daytona, we'd start on Tuesday, just start there and stay right through the week. Media day and all that, I'm sure, is part of it. Maybe that's why it's Tuesday instead of Monday. They're going to have that open for that and just cram it all together. That would be fantastic. That would make it very easy to cover the event It would make it a bit more affordable to cover it, although it's still very expensive. But I'm encouraged by that. I am encouraged by that, and the natural progression through the week. I think the one problem that needs to be worked out, and I don't know how well they have, of course, is again the lingering problem of not giving these teams enough practice. Obviously, if you're just going to have one event each day, it's not going to take the entire day to run the event. So hopefully they could still take care of that. I know Indy's had the same situation where they've now compressed what used to be an entire month of festivities into just a couple of weeks by just throwing in the wrench of doing their own infield road course race, the Indy Grand Prix over there. So that's a whole different deal from that. But again, I am encouraged. I know I've been outspoken about gimmicks and change and all that other stuff there, but I think this is a very positive change. I really do. I think that's going to be fine. And I'm intrigued by the change between the two different cars. I'm intrigued by how that's going to play out. But I like that you basically have each of the days and something's going to be happening. Whether you're covering it from home or at the track, I think it's going to be much easier to follow the action as well, because you're literally not going to have to wait those extra 3 days. Because always having that Monday through Wednesday pretty much open, I think that was always a drag. You always had an issue where you're not going to get anything to follow, and you have to kind of just sit there and just wait for the next event. And especially if you're going to move the duels to the evening like they have these last few years, it just you basically have Thursday pretty much knocked out. So it's I think it's something that maybe not long overdue, but it seems like we're really heading that direction, that it needed to be done at that point. So a good deal there from NASCAR on that. Speaking of the infield road course, another bit of news that came up today, being Tony Stewart coming out of retirement, or although drivers seem very reluctant to use that term anymore, it's just retirement from full-time competition, going to run the Xfinity Series race on the infield road course at Indianapolis this 4th of July weekend. Good deal there for him. I'm sure it's something that Indy was probably working on for a while to promote that event. Indy has, of course, had the most visible issues with trying to get those stands full, just because they have the most stands, just the biggest facility. Any drop in attendance is going to seem even more significant there. And, it's going to be a challenge already, because I imagine if running the Brickyard 400 in early August was going to be really hot weather, running it in the 4th of July is not exactly cooler temperatures. Haven't covered that one myself yet, but from what I've seen on TV and how they've covered it, and the expression on the pit reporters' faces when they're standing out there in the glaring sun, that is going to be a very big challenge. And I think we're throwing in something like that, on top of Dale Jr. running his Xfinity race at Homestead and all that at the same time. Good deal for Stewart. I think, he and, of course, Indianapolis go way back. And, it's Tony's just a racer, through and through. He kind of is certainly, the Ken Schrader type, where you can't really imagine him ever fully stopping entirely. So it's going to be interesting. That's going to be really interesting too. I don't know how he's going to be doing there. Is he going to be one of the among the leaders that's going to be competing for the win there, or is he going to be among the drivers that we're going to be talking about? And when you get to the NASCAR article for that race that weekend, that's another one that would be interested in covering here. But of course, we're still looking at the West Coast races this year, subject to change at the moment. While I mentioned that here, for those of you that are in the Patreon that have checked out the schedule that we had this year, we did do a reevaluation on our planned coverage for Texas coming up. As of right now, we've unfortunately decided to scrub that at the moment. I know we had to postpone it again last fall at November, but a few things are in kind of a state of flux right now. So unfortunately, we're unable to cover that one yet. Maybe the fall. We're looking at the fall for either Texas or Las Vegas, possibly, to add to our schedule. That depends entirely on a few other things that I got going on over here, and also from the support from you guys over on the Patreon. Big thanks to the new members that have joined up since our coverage over at Fontana. I appreciate you guys' patience with me during that weekend, because I know we had a lot of issues with the Wi-Fi and everything, and so we had a big tweet dump of every other bit of content there. But I really appreciate the interaction from everybody. I think I want to make sure that everybody knows out there, whenever I do the race coverage out there, look, I don't mind being your guy on the inside there. If you guys have anything that you want me to cover, anybody you want me to talk to or something like that, I'll do it. I think that it was a little tricky at Fontana again, because the updates I was giving you were more sporadic because of all those issues there. But I think one thing that maybe would offset that is, yeah, just keep those comments coming. Anything that's coming up that you're seeing on your end that you want me to go after, I'll go after it. I got no problem there. So big thanks again to everyone in the Patreon and the support from there. Let's jump into the other story that we have here. I'm sure more people in open wheel racing will have a better understanding of it. Is Jimmie Johnson apparently looking into some kind of situation over in open wheels? Pictures that were shown up, I believe it was Patricio Award over in the IndyCar series, showing Jimmie Johnson in a IndyCar shop with some fitted seats behind him. What that means coming up here with the month of May coming up. Are we going to see Jimmie Johnson running an open wheel? Are we not going to see it? Completely up in the air. I don't know. I know that certainly with Kurt Busch running the Indy 500 a few years ago and having as good of a run as he did have in that event, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to be looking at the possibility of other Cup guys getting in there and other people coming back and forth through the different disciplines. I think that would be great for the sport. Whether or not it's actually happening or if he's just visiting, kind of reminds me a little bit of when I talked with Casey Kane on pit road at Sonoma a couple years ago for the IndyCar race. And that was a big one to track down. I'll tell you, he was very hard to track down there at first. But obviously with him looking around at the different cars there at the time, and he was recovering from heat exhaustion after the very scary incident that he had after the race at Darlington that year, seeing him looking around Ed Carpenter's car and the possibility of him getting back into one of those cars. Kane pretty much, I didn't really ask the $25,000 question there about like if he'd consider running one of those cars, but he insisted that the reason for his visit was that he was just there to visit Ed on his way over to the races up in not Placerville, but one of the other dirt tracks that was nearby, because Kane had his sprint car team up there. So he was doing the visit up there at the same time and was also visiting with Ed. And apparently Ed and Casey had a long history. Now, is there a possibility that maybe something more has happened on that? That I don't know. I haven't seen Kane since that day. That wasn't too long before really he decided to. Kane announced his early retirement, really from the sport after that deal at Darlington. So I don't know, what he's up to. I think that's another driver that would be interesting to see spring back up again. But unfortunately, I don't have any other information beyond that experience that I had a couple of years ago back when they did. I think that was the last IndyCar finale they had at Sonoma before the deal got moved over to Laguna Seca last year. But it did kind of remind me of that, talking about the deal with Tony Stewart and everything like that. And Jimmie Johnson's thing too. But I think the motorsports world has really benefited when you have drivers that are willing to hop back and forth between different disciplines. I think there's a lot more respect that's earned for the special skills that are required to do one or the other. We talk about Tony Stewart, for example, is not removed from that either. I mean, having done a ride swap at Watkins Glen a few years ago, Gordon did that over at Indianapolis. I believe it was with Juan Montoya. All these other competitors that are really just trying to get a handle on running these cars. And then you have situations where sometimes they come over and they do, play in our sandbox here. When you had Al Unser Jr. Go from winning the Indy 500 in 1992 in a photo finish, 1993, he comes out and runs at Daytona, makes the Daytona 500, even though he wadded up a car in the duels. And then he works his way up to the front, only get wrecked by Dale Earnhardt. So, open wheel stars have different levels of success in the sport there, but I think it only helps enrich the sport there. And again, it's a fine line between a gimmick that is something that's just pointless and inhibits the competition. Then you have like something like that where it's an opportunity to enhance the level of competition. I think that's really for the sport's benefit. And I'd like to see a lot more of it. I think that would be better. So we'll see what happens there. But Jimmie Johnson and Tony Stewart both making things very interesting the days ahead, and on top of everything else. I didn't really talk about. I know I mentioned that I wanted to talk about this in the last show that we did after Fontana. Much more awake than I was that day. But the single lug nut thing before the versus the 5 lug nut thing, I do stand by my message earlier that I posted on Twitter that I'm really against anything that reduces the level of skill involved. And by that, I mean not necessarily making something so that it is easy, but making something easier, really. And I think, and by that, I think the 5 lug nut stop, I think it's not saying that doing a 1 lug nut stop is easy. I think there were a lot of people that were confused about that from the message that I posted there. A single lug nut stop is not easy. Although sometimes the Formula One guys make it seem easy because they just have the crew just sit in folding chairs watching the race like you or I would. And then they come out for the pit stop. They're on their knees already. When the car comes in, they don't have to even move an inch, just bzz, bzz, and then the guy goes back out again. I'm sure there's a lot more involved in it, but the visuals make it look like it's not that difficult. But I think it's very easy to say that doing a 5 lug nut stop is harder than a 1 lug nut stop. That's what I mean at that point. That doing that in that certain pattern, my brother did some work in the an industry where you have to use an impact gun there, and that there is a certain pattern. You got to go like over 2 and back 1, kind of doing that. If you're using it in actual industry, trying to join together metals and everything, there's a certain pattern you got to do with it, different from what you see in racing, where you have to do it in kind of that star pattern and get that thing on there, or just the 5 on 5 off mentality. There's a real artistry to that, and there's a real challenge to that. I think with the 1 lug nut stop, okay, I mean, your NASCAR is certainly accomplishing what they've been doing by getting rid of things like the catch can man over the years and making it so that you need as few people on pit road as possible, and being very draconian with their rules and penalizing things where a guy just reaches over to grab a tire or something like that you think would be something that's in the interest of safety, but just coming down, really kind of guiding things a little bit away from having as many crew members over pit wall as possible. I think Bob Pockris was talking about this earlier today or is here Pockris or Gluck? It was one of them, was talking about the trend being more towards fewer and fewer crew members out there, and not just the loss of the catch can man, but the loss of other systems involved there. So I think that's really the trend that we're heading to with that. As for the single lug nut stop itself, I mean, I think that some people have said this, and I think it's a fair point, that how many of us actually watch the races for the pit stops? I mean, not so much. Fontana, for example, I found it very easy to step away during the cautions to upload the tweets because I don't usually watch the pit stops that closely too much. I look more at the back of the field. Now, of course, sometimes last place changes during pit stops and a stop takes on greater significance. I know our buddy Sebastian LaForge was giving us some more context on how certain stops were going on the 66 car during Sunday's race. But I think that the ultimately you want to see competition on the track. Pit stops get more significant in that sense from that whole deal. But yeah, I do believe that there is a reduction in the reliance on skill, and a little bit more of the humanity, I think, is taken out of the sport. And it sounds like I'm exaggerating a bit, but really think about the trend that we've had in motorsports, especially in NASCAR these few years, that it used to be you would have these fiberglass bodies and they would do these, you'd have these skilled craftsmen there in the shop. Not to say people aren't skilled now, they absolutely are, but the art itself has changed now. Now you're working on pre-assembled panels and I mean, obviously in the Xfinity series, you have like assembled cars working out that way. It's very precise now. There's no wiggle room. Look at how hard NASCAR came down on the Toyota teams for just having a little thing that wasn't supposed to be there below the crest on the Toyotas and the Cup series. Look at how hard they came down on Carl Long's Xfinity team for just having a little bit of Bondo in the front piece there, below the headlight on the front part of the Timmy Hill's car in the Xfinity series. The tolerances are so narrow now that there really is no room for innovation. There's no room for creativity. And I know this has been complained about plenty of times over the last few years. It hasn't really changed, but I think we're seeing really the effect of that, and how much each of these changes have been made to perhaps make it easier for some people to do some aspects of it, but it's made it harder to be creative about it and find that competitive advantage there and try something different there. That's the real challenge. And so that's kind of been where I see that going. It's unfortunate in that sense. I mean, just look at one of the old, the old uh, intros they used to do for the Daytona 500, and they'd show. I mean, everything was, I mean, I really didn't like it when they got rid of having metal hoods on the cars and making it fiberglass. I mean, we saw mentioning Jeremy Clements' incident at Daytona a few weeks ago. The immediate effect of that thing flaps up, it just shatters itself to pieces because it's just nothing. It's just like real lightweight material, strong material, but not metal. It's not something that bends. It's not something that tweaks. It's not something that when the car gets in a wreck, you could come in, you could like push it out or push this in or do something like that. And then you have the crash clock on top of it where you can't even add panels. You have to add tape to it. So you're basically like you're driving like a cardboard box out there, and it tears easily. So you got to put some tape on it and get that thing back out there. You don't have a piece of metal that can be molded, that can be fixed, that can be warped, that can be twisted. People may not like the Twisted Sister cars in like 2006, 2007, that kind of era, but there was some artistry there. There's no artistry really allowed in any of these other ones. And again, we're talking real small tolerances. I don't know what exactly was the situation for Truex back at Fontana last week, the reason that he kept failing the inspection, but I imagine it was something pretty small in that same sense. But I did think it was strange that Truex wasn't, if I remember correctly, Truex wasn't caught by the Las Vegas penalties for that piece under the nose, but he was caught for the deal on the back at Fontana there. But again, this is the real challenge behind everything on that. But yeah, that's really the kind of different deal there. And yeah, and I'm seeing your comment there, Stephen C. You raise a good point. I mean, once you have created a situation where maybe these skills aren't needed, I mean, that could be somebody's job, or maybe they're put into some other position and they got to retrain, or they're just let go entirely. That could be very serious, of course, as well. I mean, it could be very much like what we had in 2008 or 2008 to 2009, where you had a lot of teams shut down, and people may not have liked starting park teams, but that was the only reason that some of these guys were even able to stay employed. They would be doing the same job they always did. Maybe it was on a car that wasn't going to run the entire race. It was just going to run 5 laps, but at least they had a job, and at least they had some form to do that. Now with the box, that again, the box is getting more and more constrained. We have now, we're getting closer and closer to that threshold of just having the 36 chartered guys out there. If there really is a deal with Premium and Rick Ware, one buying the other or something like that, and there is possibility there. I don't know anything specific on that, but that's definitely how Premium sure made its bones, is buying other teams there. That's something that's kind of steering us that direction. But it's I don't know where the future is going to be on that, or where exactly we're going to be headed. But this is, again, and we talk about innovations, we talk about gimmicks, we talk about changes and all that. I think on the one hand, you can't be in there and just say like, oh, I don't like change for change's sake. I think that a lot of, but I do think that some of these changes are, being scrutinized a bit more, more than others. I'm not crazy about the one lug nut thing, because again, I go back to the same theme of reducing skill, and I think that much like the fabricators, or at least the approach to NASCAR fabricating, has fundamentally changed, and we're making it so that it's not easy to do. It's still not easy to do. You still need skilled people, but you are making it easier to do. And whether it's something that is going to be, in the name of cost saving measures or anything else, it's still a change that it kind of isn't really. It could be in the name of reducing costs. It could be in the name of reducing a team's overhead or whatever else it is. But there's definitely it definitely seems sometimes that NASCAR is on this trajectory that, okay, here's ultimately where we want to be. Where we want to be is like a like Trans Am, or like an SCCA term, where you have cars with rims, where you have cars where the number is placed in a silly spot, where you have pretty much a prefab kind of thing. Everybody gets their car from one spot. Not saying Trans Am's like that. There's a lot of innovation in there, but it's kind of trying to do something like that. I think that's a different. I don't know what their ultimate goal is. I think every time they bring up some of these changes here, it makes me wonder where ultimately they're looking to go, or are they looking that far ahead? Are they just looking for simple stopgap measures? And this brings me to the other thing. I'm seeing your comment there, Vortex Chaos. I'm going to get to that subject too. But the car number placements. I didn't talk about this as much in our post Fontana show, but I want to hit on this now. I thought it was very interesting to see a survey where you had 6 different number placements and asking fans to rank them from worst to best. I really liked the tweet that was posted. I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the person that did it, but did a very good job of showing, why it's silly to kind of place these numbers in other places. Like, this isn't a sports car. We don't need the number in the front. This isn't the touring car. We don't put it in the opera window. It's ridiculous. And I think it's also ridiculous because in NASCAR's mind, all 36 of these teams have sponsors for every race in the season. So, okay, we need to rearrange where the car number is so that the sponsor is more visible. Well, maybe that would have been a good idea in 1998 or 2000, where everybody had a sponsor and all those sponsors wanted to get the most exposure possible. But that's not the case right now. There's a lot of teams out there. I saw that plain white car that Garrett Smithley ran for Rick Ware Racing. I saw that Brennan Poole ran a plain white car until it was rewrapped ultimately, but ultimately was a plain white one. Or you had Reed Sorensen back there. That was the 77 car is plain black. And I'm not talking about open teams. These are chartered teams. I mean, not the 66, but the 15 and the 77 certainly are. And they don't even have sponsors out there. So what's the point of rearranging something where it's okay? I mean, again, we're only looking at the front of the field. This is where you really need to look at the full field here. Let's focus on getting these guys sponsors. Let's focus on, if we really are doing the things that are going to be reducing costs, like using different materials or using prefab pieces or something like that, let's make sure they actually are taken care of to begin with. And then we can work from that point. But of course, that doesn't seem to be where we're heading really right now. I think we're instead heading towards, we're just looking at the front field and say, hey, I think that William Byron's car would look better with Exalta on the side of it. So it looks like a touring car. It's like that. Look, NASCAR is not touring cars. NASCAR is not sports car racing. It's not what Goody's Dash Series used to be, even though that was NASCAR affiliated. It's not any of these other things. The number is on the door. And I know some people have said that this is crossing the line too much for them from all the other changes. And I'm in that camp too. And I know that there were teams like the fabulous Hudson Hornet that had their numbers on the fenders, had their numbers on the back, and it hasn't always been door numbers, but it's usually been door numbers. Okay. And let's really have, this is where I think you really need to have somebody involved in the sport that has an interest in like the best interest of the sport. Like, any change just doesn't just go through, like it goes through this person or this group. And so they say, wait a minute, we could do this, but is this something that's like in the spirit of stock car racing? Kind of like the best interest of baseball or the best interest of football. I think we talked about this before, and I guess there is a commissioner or commissioning unit, but if there is, they're letting an awful lot of stuff slide through, stuff that shouldn't be sliding through. And this is one of them. You keep that number on the door. You keep that number on the door. You do that. Okay. The number on the door just looks the best. Okay. That's the thing that attracted me to the sport. If I liked the number being in some other place, I would have been into IndyCar. I would have been into Formula One. I would have been into sports cars. But I like that number on the door. It's simple. When the kid draws a race car, he draws a big circle with wheels and he puts the number right in the middle of the door. And you got to keep that. Okay. That's what makes a stock car a stock car. And if we're changing everything around it, if it's going to be one lug nut, if it's going to have a rear diffuser on it, if it's going to have lower horsepower, if it's going to be running at infield road courses, if it's going to be this, that, and something else, can we at least have the number be on the door? Okay. I mean, NASCAR has already made it so that they don't like triple digit numbers. And I agree with that too. So, okay. So you have what? That makes 109 numbers you can pick. I mean, okay. You pick one of those and you get it on the door. That's where it needs to be, on the door and on the roof. And I know that, spotters don't need, they say that spotters don't need this because there's obviously there's more things that are electronic and everything like that. But you know what? They still need to look at it, and these cars get banged up or something like that. Then they tape the number back on there. That's part of it too. But it has to be there. I mean, that's the brand identity of the team. That is the history of the sport. When you talk about that number, when you see that number, you see the history of that number. You see the history of that team. And you place it somewhere else, you lose that. The thing in the rear oppa window is stupid. First of all, these cars need more ventilation. They don't need something else that's going to block it. Yeah, they could probably work around that and have like a number that's going to, be printed on the rear ductwork or something like that. But no, I think the more important focus is the air circulation. We're going to see this be an issue again this summer because they haven't done anything to change the right side windows and how much heat gets trapped in the car. Wasn't an issue at Fontana because it was nice and cool. It was like, I think it got warmer than 65 degrees that entire day on Sunday. But this is the different situation. You need to have those numbers be visible. Don't have it on the upper windows. Don't have it on the front. Because again, think about the other thing that makes NASCAR unique, or at least is supposed to. It's the close competition. It's the fact these guys run into each other. They get the tire marks on it. You put it on the rear, you put it on that rear panel there below the quarter panel. One blown tire, you can't see the number anymore. Well, okay, then you got a problem at that point. Same thing in front of the front wheels. You run into somebody else, you get it crushed in there. Suddenly you can't see that. And I think the other thing that they accidentally revealed by showing, their sample there is that there still is a lot of space where you have the number in the middle. You could put the sponsor here where the contingency decals used to be. You could put a sponsor there. You can put a sponsor on the roof. And I didn't like that to begin with, but I'm convincing myself, okay, that's not a big deal because the roof is curved. It almost looks like it's part of the rear glass if you look at it a little differently. So I'm kind of getting used to that. But yeah, you got to have the number on the roof. You have to have the number on the doors. And if everything else has changed and everything else is going to change, at least let that still be there. I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't think it's unreasonable to require that. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But yeah, like again, if I like numbers being in different places, I would have liked a different racing series. And I think that if we're looking at really making sure that the sport stays alive and stays in people's minds, the visuals matter. I think that people sometimes forget that the optics do matter when you're presenting a sport. This is the same exact issue we had when they got rid of basically the modifications of the car tomorrow and decided, okay, screw it. We're just going to do the Gen 6. We're going to give it more body contours. We're going to make the car look better. And apparently that's still the same spirit that's in everybody's mind looking at the next gen car. We'll see how successful they are at that. But we'll find out. So that's kind of that's kind of what I think on that standpoint there. Let me get back to Vortex Chaos's point here, because this was this was another story that came up more on my route here. The truck engines reduced to 3,000 miles at the max. Getting hit bending hard, suffered from hundreds of lost money. Daytona's DNQ and the Martinsville DNF last season. Okay, so yeah, we've seen this a bit already with the existing rules. This came up with Motorsports Business Management. I know we're talking Cup Series instead of Truck Series, but bear with me. On the Cup Series side, the sealed engines thing has been an obstacle. You think of Martinsville last year, or gosh, no, I think it was 2 years ago. Yeah, it was 2 years ago because Joey Gase ran the 66 at Phoenix. So 2 years ago, when Timmy Hill was running the rewards.com paint scheme on the 66 car, the one that kind of like Darrell Waltrip's car, they ran it at Martinsville. They had a fire under the car, much like what Tommy Joe Martins had last week. Warped the hood, had to have significant repairs to the car. The hood, of course, is really expensive with the new material that's under. And they had a situation where by the time they got over to Phoenix, they had a situation where they couldn't run the same engine or some kind of deal. So they had to do a workaround on that. The sponsor wanted them to run Phoenix, even though Carl Long didn't really want the car back out there, that it was kind of a pain. The team was kind of saying like, look, we're just kind of doing this out of obligation for the sponsor and keeping them out there. So what the workaround they had to do is they had to use the owner points that Mark Thompson had when he ran the 66 at Daytona, because Thompson had his own owner points separate from Carl Long. So it went from basically the 66 to the 166, which was under Thompson, or it might have been vice versa. Maybe Thompson had the 66 and Carl had the 166. But one way or the other, they had to use a complete workaround just to get the car in the race. I bring this up because this may be something that maybe comes up in the Truck Series, and maybe something that these other Truck Series teams have to deal with. I think that anything that's gonna cap the mileage that you could use on the engines of the Truck Series, that is going to be a significant problem for these other teams, and you're probably going to force them to start and park more to make sure that they don't hit that 3,000-mile max. We're already seeing that this year. We saw the 34 truck pull out early with Josh Bilicki last week in Las Vegas. Don't know if it was a mechanical issue or it was a start and park, but it did seem like that truck was off, and then they had to pull it off at the beginning of the race, kind of like Ray Cicerelli back at Mosport. I think one thing that was most startling at Mosport last year, as it being a Truck Series standalone race, although they had other supporting events, a standalone for NASCAR, you really do see how close on the margins these Truck Series teams operate at. They have very little that they can work with. Any small change can have a significant effect on a lot of these small organizations. And again, it's a shame to see yet another change that is potentially going to be hurting them after so many of them did so well back at Daytona to open the season. Back at Mosport, Jennifer Jo Cobb was talking with her other crew members about making sure they had enough money just to pay the toll to get the truck back over the border. They were basically taking a pool and passing the hat around to make sure that they had enough to get back over. They had an issue there. We saw that with the Truck Series also for when Cobb came to Talladega and she spun out, didn't have tires, and the fans had to buy tires there. Norm Benning, same deal. A situation where they have to just get the best run they can. And then like you mentioned there, the wreck he had at Martinsville was huge. I mean, this is, Benning usually comes home with the thing in one piece, whether he runs the full race or doesn't. Even at Mosport, he had a good race with Cobb for a lot of the latter stages of that, and ended up further back in the lineup. But I'm not really a big fan of that. I guess we'll see how it plays out, but it definitely seems like it's another thing that's going to target these small teams, because again, the engines and the brakes are what I keep hearing are the most expensive elements on these cars and trucks, for that matter. I don't think it's too different from the Truck Series from the car to the cars. I think that's another big issue on that. Yep. And just look at your comment, Beast of Metal. Yeah, I agree with you too. Yeah, you can have a sponsor number combination and have that be identifiable. I know that it seems like nowadays we don't really have that because the sponsors change every week. Sometimes they change during the weekend. Used to be you only saw that kind of thing at Daytona where you had somebody unsponsored, they qualify for the race, they get a sponsor and some kind of deal like that. I remember even in 2011, Brian Keselowski makes the field for the Daytona 500 in a old Gillette Evernham car from 2006 with a new body on it. And they had sponsorship from, they had competing sponsorship offers from Discount Tire and Golden Corral come on the car. They got offered an engine from Penske that the only reason they didn't run it is because it didn't fit the engine mounts because the car was so old. Those are the kind of stories you want to see, all the time there. But you don't really see that as much nowadays. In just Daytona. Now you're seeing that in a lot of other places that, of course, now you have even something like at Fontana where you have these unsponsored guys, they're already locked into the field, and then the sponsorship just doesn't come. We talked a lot about the sponsorship that was on the 89 car and the Xfinity side for Landon Castle. We talk about, you saw that they had a lot of hotel sponsors on the cars. Now, I know that that's not literally the hotel, some random hotel going out there and saying, "Oh, hey, let's put our logo on your car." I'm sure the reason that came out is that that's where the crew is staying, and they said, "Okay, well, look, if you take like $100 maybe off of the cost of the hotel, we'll put your logo on the car and give you some exposure." I wouldn't surprise me if that's how they do it. That's how I would do it, because I know how expensive those hotels can end up being. Believe me. By the way, very thankful to the folks over at the Roadway Inn outside the track in Ontario, where we did our show a week ago Friday. They had very good Wi-Fi. I'm glad the show came out well. Enjoyed doing that on the road. Hope to do more of that. I wanted to do one on Saturday and Sunday. Logistically, that didn't really work out because we got back late Saturday. And then Sunday we were on the road and didn't really have anything on the phone. But hopefully we'll do that some more for Sonoma, our next race coming up in June, at least our next planned one, and have some more information for you on that. And so that's kind of where we are. Now, I know that I'm missing other news stories because there was so much stuff that's come up today. We talked about the Busch Clash being a road course race and the compressed schedule for SpeedWeeks. We talked about Tony Stewart running the the Indianapolis infield road course for the July NASCAR weekend coming up. We talked about Jimmie Johnson possibly doing something in open wheels. The teaser picture with him in the Ally Bank uniform at, what was it? It was at Aero Schmidt Peterson Motorsports there. And some, what looked like some fitted seats behind him that Patricio Ward put up. Let's see. Do we have anything else that's okay? Let me look at my Twitter feed here, make sure I'm not missing it. I'm sure I'm missing something. It seemed like we just had a complete torrent of stories coming in. We talked about the number placement, we talked about the single lug thing, talked about the Patreon, talked about other stuff from Fontana. Let me mention this while I'm thinking about this. I don't know if I hit this enough on our Fontana post race show. I really want to make sure I'm clear on this. The tributes to Jimmie Johnson and Fontana were fantastic. I think the track did a fantastic job there. I think NASCAR did a good job. And let me tell you this, when Johnson took the lead for those couple of moments there, it was electric. It was akin to something like, you have a driver that's not taking the lead in a long time and getting a good run out there. The crowd was definitely with him. There were a ton of people out there wearing Johnson outfits and everything. And it was, the 5 wide salute was received really well. I don't know how well the broadcast showed it there, but yeah, the crowd was just electric when he was taking the lead there. There was a great battle for the top spot there, and he was throwing the punches just as well as Truex and Hamlin and Alex Bowman and the others were there. So a good run for him there. And that was really fun to see, I got to say. I don't know if I covered that too much there. Yes. Sonoma, we're bringing the carousel back. Yes. Thank you, Vortex Chaos. Big fan of that. I think we haven't seen the very best out of the carousel yet because, and correct me if I'm wrong, the package that they're running this weekend at Phoenix, the lower downforce, smaller spoiler package, they're going to be running that at the road courses, right? That was my understanding, is that the road courses were going to be part of that. I believe that's the case. If that is the case, I think we're going to see a much better race at Sonoma than we did last year. We were supposed to have a good race last year, but as I spoke with a lot of the drivers there in the garage area last year, a lot of those drivers were exhausted because of the heat issues. We talked about that already. But also, aero sensitivity became a big factor at Sears Point for the first time. And it's never been a factor there. You can have, you go back to Jerry Nadeau's, the video I did on Jerry Nadeau, and seeing how beat up that 44 car is and how far back, how he was able to still have a big lead, or having somebody run on old tires and still have a big lead and get a good run. Terry Labonte in 2006, same deal there. I think that the reason that the race last year maybe wasn't as good as we expected it would be, I know certainly it wasn't as competitive as I thought, is because of that we had the large spoiler, the same ridiculous aero package from everywhere else. I think we're going to see a much better race this time around. And I like that it's still 90 laps. And I like that the third stage is as long as it is still, that they haven't messed that up too much. Although I know they've changed the distribution between the length of the first stage and the second stage versus the third one. I think it's going to be a good race. I think we're going to see a much better race. And I'm not going to say it's going to be historic like 1993 or even 2016. But I know that and I saw in the comments there that there were some people that are very skeptical, thinking of my glasses too much, skeptical about the return of the carousel, thinking that it's going to be too slow. I would hold off judgment until this year's race. I think this year's race is going to be a much better indication of it. And I think it's going to be a good one there. So definitely stay tuned on that. And that's definitely something that I'm looking to cover again this year, of course, to continue that. Again, subject to approval. We still do one race at a time and kind of work that out. But that's what we're looking at for our next round here. I think that would be a much better race. I think it will be. I like also that it's longer than it used to be, that it used to be 74 laps and now it's 90 laps, meaning 74 laps from 1997 earlier back to 89. I think making it a longer race is closer to what we need to have. I think Watkins Glen's race should be longer at the same time. I think we'll see a better race there because of that. You remember last year, Martin Truex and Chase Elliott wanted to race each other and were right on each other's tails, but one couldn't get around the other. Same problem. I know that that's a much faster track. It is definitely the super speedway to the short track that Sears Point is, but it shouldn't be that difficult to get around somebody. It should be able to happen. The race that I went to the year before that, they put on a fantastic show out there, I have to say. And even with Chase Elliott being as good as he was, I think that it was still a good race. It was still a good race. So hopefully we'll get back to that. I do think that, yeah. So I know I'm going round on this, but I do think bringing the carousel back for Sears Point is a good idea. I hope it stays that way, at least the foreseeable future. But I think definitely for those that are skeptical of it, I think definitely watch this year's and give it a chance on that, because I think it'll be a better product than what we had without it, quite honestly. So I think we're in a good position there. Let me see here. Okay, single lug nuts. The 2021 car. I stand by my statement that the cautions, the stage cautions, don't need to be there at Sears Point or at the road courses in general. I think those are stupid. I think that one of the best things about the road courses, especially since Jeff Bodine stumbled into this idea back at when he won his last race at Watkins Glen in '96, I want to say, counting the race backwards and figuring out your pit strategy. That is the most interesting part of the road courses. On top of the fact that you have the close competition and fighting these completely ill handling cars around the track, trying to make them as neutral as possible to fight them around there. I think that's really where everything needs to be. I think that's something to look at. Where is it? Any two passing zones, removes two passing zones from Sears Point. I would say at best, no, I don't think it removes two passing zones. I think, having seen races on the 2.52 track as well as the other one, the problem that you have with the version with the chute, and they've changed it several times. The chute that we have now is very different from the one that was first introduced in 1998, when they actually made it curved and had it blend right into the S's. It was almost like a corner before you had the S's there. I don't think so, because turn 7 is still a passing zone. I think turn 7 is a better passing zone, quite honestly, by coming out of the carousel and coming uphill there. I think that if you watch, I know you say you haven't seen a race, responding to Beast of Metal here. If you haven't seen a race in the 2.52 mile track, I'd recommend certainly watching one of them. Either watching 1993, I think is still probably the best race ever run there with the old configuration. I'd highly recommend watching that. But you'll see that obviously things have changed now, where back then they used to have like a really sandy outcropping area and a lot of unpaved areas where cars could get off in the dirt and make things a little bit crazier. Now all of that is paved. It's gone the same trajectory as Watkins Glen, where I believe it was in 2011, they just paved a whole lot of their runoff areas and got rid of sand traps and everything. Sears Point's kind of gone that way too. But no, I think the only passing zone that I think arguably people would have thought would have been eliminated is turn 7. But I think turn 7 wasn't really a very good passing zone on the chute, because you would have to basically route somebody out of the way coming down coming down the chute, really, into that corner, and having that run, that hard right-hand turn that kind of turns back on itself. They call it the Budweiser bottleneck over at the track. I think it's better to be coming uphill out of the carousel into that corner, because it makes it a much more low speed corner, closer to what you have in turn 11. What you want is a corner that's as close to turn 11 as possible. And that's really something that I think is better. I think the other part that hasn't really been explored as much, because I think we had that issue with the aero package last year, is turn 4, the new turn 4, or at least I guess the old turn 4, when you have turn 3 at the top of the track and you go downhill a little bit and you enter the complex where the carousel is. That is a good passing zone. A lot of aggressive passes used to happen there, because there used to be a hill there and it would just be cut off and you had to make another abrupt right-hand turn there. The right-hand turns at Sears Point are the key passing zones, from my understanding there. And I think you had a lot of places that maybe were spectacular looking, like turn 3 is, where you had people that would pop up on 2 wheels and get sideways and stuff, but you wouldn't actually have any passing there. What you would have is people just like fanning out and doing some crazy stuff. And my brother and I always took a pull on waiting for somebody to actually run into that wall where you're exiting turn 4 on the old the chute configuration, where you fan out and you're trying to get back in line. everybody just kept cutting that closer and closer until you had a wreck there. I think Stenhouse, actually, his last place finish, he had about the closest to a wreck there that ultimately dropped into the last spot in that one. You have places the people to fan out in that configuration, but I don't think it's strictly speaking a passing zone, because everybody always talks about the turn 11 and turn 10, the least respected but most critical corner of the track, is still just as serious in either configuration, because you are carrying a ton of speed in there. And much like other treacherous tracks on certain road courses, the runoff area is really limited because there's a freeway right behind it, or the highway. I think it's Highway 121 is right behind turn 10, that furthest outcropping. So the runoff area isn't going to get any bigger. And you had cars coming through there at great speed and trying to set up for a good interest at turn 11. That's really what you want. And that's what you have, like at the exit of the carousel going up into turn 7. So yeah, the carousel is, yeah. Yeah, no, I see what you guys are saying in the comments. Yeah, I know some people don't like the carousel, but yeah, I'm definitely on team carousel for sure. Got good memories there of watching the races through there. That was the corner that gave Dale Earnhardt the winning pass in 1995 and the only road course win he ever had. So if you want to say that that's not a passing zone, gosh, you got to reevaluate. That's definitely one to watch right there. I think what was great about that is you would have people setting up passes. Actually, go back to 1989. I think the winning pass, or at least very nearly the winning pass in 89 in the inaugural race, was in turn 7 with the old configuration where you had Ricky Rudd and Rusty Wallace going door to door, and Rudd shoving Wallace off into the dirt, kind of a rematch of their battle to the finish at Watkins Glen in 88. That's a really different deal. Yeah, the finish with Stewart and Hamlin in 2016, that was definitely a surprise. I was in the media center when that happened, and most of the replays seem to just show the onboard of the 11. But it seemed like he was almost a little off the pace when Stewart was bashing his way by him. I don't think the fix was in, though. I think Hamlin would have much rather won that race. He was that was a very difficult move there at the end. I mean, when your rear tires are so worn out there. Allmendinger was talking about this a couple of years ago. Your rear tires are worn out so quickly. You don't really have any good handle coming through that corner there. The wheel hop is really significant. Any corner you could overdrive through the wheel hop and perhaps slide a bit higher out. I think turn 7, and then perhaps to a lesser degree, turn 4 could be great passing zones. But last year's race, I don't think, is the best measure of how good those passing zones are. You have to look further back. And I think this June, I'm hoping this June is going to be comparable to that. You're going to have a good battle there and a good race there. Let's see. Just checking your guys' other comments here. Yeah, the carousel itself doesn't have much passing. I mean, I did mention the Dale Earnhardt thing. That did require somebody to be dropping oil in that corner for that to happen. But it sets up a passing opportunity, and that is the passing opportunity in turn 7. Having watched a lot of the field go into turn 7, especially if you stand in the turn 2 stands, you get a good view of the entrance to 7. It seemed like it just becomes kind of follow the leader. Like it could be maybe too wide in that corner, but then people kind of slot into line. It's a little tricky to make a pass there, because the fastest way around is on the inside, and you basically have to wreck somebody to get through there. I think if you have turn 7 be a bit of a slower corner, closer to turn 11, you don't necessarily have to drill that guy and get him out of the way. You could probably get under him and at least set up that pass. That area that comes out of the carousel is actually really wide because it merges into the drag strip. And so you have a lot of pavement to work with. I know the drag strip is separated off on the front stretch, which is too bad. I think that's one thing that needs to be changed back at the track to get it back to where it used to be, is they made turn 1, the complex into turn 1 to turn 2 is way too slow now. It used to be much, much faster. Make sure you have barriers there, put a safer barrier there so nobody, you don't have any serious accidents in that corner, because that was a problem too. But have it be a lot faster of an entrance, because that used to be a great passing opportunity. If you didn't completely complete the pass in turn 11, you could complete the pass in a turn 1 and then finish it in 2, and then you got ahead of them there. That was always really exciting, even in either configuration. Actually, it wasn't just one in the earlier one. Yeah. I'm just seeing from the comments here, of course, thoughts and prayers to everybody over in Nashville. Obviously, seeing the pictures and everything of what's going on out there, just the scale of that is shocking. I know John Roberts is out there, and others they're dealing with that there. So if you're definitely watching from that area, we're definitely all thinking of you out there because obviously a big thing going on out there. Let's see. What is this here? Any other topics you guys want to talk about here? Definitely feel free to mention. I'm sure. Again, I'm looking on here to make sure I didn't miss something here. Do. Somebody boiled it down to like 4 or 5 data points here of what the big stories were today. Only in week 4, yeah. Gosh, I mean, it's been busy already. Been too much stuff to talk about this week, but that's the fun part. And this is again the big reason that we're doing these live streams a bit more free form. I mean, no point sitting on this all the way until Sunday to do that. So yeah. Oh, you're in Columbia, Stephen C. Oh goodness, yeah, that's the not too far from there. Beautiful country out there. I got to say, we did the road trip through Darlington last year. Really enjoyed that neck of the woods. We're looking to do next time we do one of these races out of market. We'd love to do something that's in a different area that we could do another big road trip on. Looks like it probably won't be this year, but we'll look at. We're kind of waiting. We're kind of in wait and see protocol on what the 2021 schedule is going to look like, and then we'll have a better idea at that point. Let's see. Doot. So just Xfinity in the Cup Series this weekend. We're gonna have the article. The preview article is pretty much done, so that's gonna be ready for you guys overnight tonight. So you'll have that tomorrow morning. Give you a preview of the fields there for those races. Of course, we're gonna do the articles for those races this week, unless there's any other big news stories between now and then. The next live stream will most likely be this Sunday to do a wrap up there after Phoenix. That's right. Gosh, already getting into the rhythm there. But Phoenix is definitely one we're looking at doing November. That'll be certainly to close out the season and our schedule this year. We would like to give out more of those last car certificates there, the closing thing there. So definitely check out with that. So, yeah, just load up the field there for the Busch Clash. I mean, that could be it. I mean, just invite. I mean, if you're gonna have a situation where everybody has these Gen 6 cars and they can't get rid of them, I guess maybe you just kind of just eliminate any requirements, just let everybody out there. I think that's really going to be the thing. Maybe they haven't thought this through, or maybe they have. Is like, how many laps is it going to be? Are they going to do stages? They're going to do cautions. I mean, if they have a cautions there, it's going to take forever. So they're going to have to either just not have cautions or not have stages or what. But I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at with that. Hope you don't mind having the microphone just in my hand like this. It looks a little bush league, but we're gonna probably invest in a table setup here in a little bit. But as you can see, we're moving stuff around off of everything. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be a complete crash fest, but I mean, come on, we've already had that this year, so I mean, it can't possibly be worse. I mean, could it? It's possible, I guess. But yeah. Well, just make it short. I think that would be the other thing too. You have to make it a short race. Let's not make this a big gauntlet to start off with, or something like the Indy Grand Prix where it's almost like treating it like a points race. I think it needs to be something still short and special and comparable in length to the duels or something like that at least. Maybe even shorter than that. Maybe make it like, I don't know, like I mean if it's around the infield road course, like I don't know, 25 laps or something. I mean, that'd be kind of a throwback to the way it used to be where it was like 20, 25 laps on the big track. So, lap speeds are going to be off, of course, so you're going to have to factor that in. Um, yeah. I saw somebody post a comment where they're suggesting that having like open practice for the Clash be merged into the Roar before the 24. I think that's a great idea. I'm not a big sports car expert, although I do really enjoy road course racing. But I think that I've really enjoyed the 24 hours of Daytona the last few years, and maybe kind of do some kind of interesting deal on that. I think that would be a lot of fun to do. Yeah, iRock races 30 laps. Yeah, I think sounds about right. Gosh, that'd be a series I need to bring back again, but don't know if we're gonna get that again. Let's see. I think road course under the lights. Oh my goodness. Could you have just gone back to the 20 lap format? Well, yeah. I mean, they could have, but would they? That's the real question. Do, 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 do. See a cup race at Road America. That would be fun. Just kind of browsing the comments on everything here. Yeah. Do, 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 do. Yeah, I know they do. Yeah, the rear numbers, kind of going back to that. And somebody made a comment about this about using the old numbers for the Pinty's guys. I know that was definitely a thing there. I mean, I still thought the Pinty's cars had the numbers on the doors look the best. It doesn't. It's not even specifically restricted to just the Cup Series. I think of the Xfinity trucks and Pinty Series, the modifieds. I think all that they look better on the door, especially in modifieds. You get it on the door for those things. You got the rail and everything on there that just looks amazing. I'd like to do a modified coverage one of these days. That's one thing they have to do. New Hampshire one of these days. That's one that we haven't done. That would be really neat to do. That's the thing. I don't mean to hammer this too many times, but actually, at the end of the day, I haven't really covered that many different tracks in person. We've only done trackside coverage for this website since 2014. And Sears Point's kind of been our yearly thing until very recently. When we added Darlington in 17, that was only 3 years ago. So we did Sears Point, we did Darlington, Mo Sport, um, Watkins Glen, although they didn't approve the credentials there, Phoenix, and then we added Fontana. So that's pretty much, I think it's just those six. So, got a ways to go there, but we're looking to tick some more off on the list there. I think a big ones I'd like to do. I mean, Martinsville, I think would be a lot of fun, especially that cutoff race going into Phoenix. I think that was Phoenix. I think was in a really good spot as being that cutoff race, but I think Martinsville is a good follow up to that. I do stand by. I think Fontana would be a good finale there, just because the weather would be better in November and it would be a good 500-mile race, much like IndyCar or Kart or whichever one of those series had that. Yeah. No, standalone races are fun. I know William Saki, our ARCA correspondent, does a good job over at Road America. He knows that place like the back of his hand, so he's got that. And I enjoyed Mosport there, and it was cool to see the Truck Series guys get that much hype. Like there was a great crowd there to watch everything happen there on that hill over the front stretch there, and they put on a good show. I know Moffitt kind of put a whooping on the field there, but it kind of worked out all right there. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, you could change up the finale and kind of make it fresh that way. That'd be kind of interesting. But I don't know how I mean, it seems like with football and with these other sports, I mean, you could probably shake things up a little bit easier. With racing, I think there's other logistical concerns that they got to work out. But I think the biggest thing on the schedule for any realignment, they really need to reevaluate which tracks have two dates. Because I know they're saying like, oh, well, this track they can't exist anymore if they don't have two dates. It's like, well, okay, Sears Point has one date. Watkins Glen is probably the most popular track on the circuit. They only have one date. Okay, they're making it work. I would rather have a variety of tracks rather than having a track have two dates a year. But I mean, the whole point of having a track having 2 dates is because they scaled the schedule back in the early '70s, and they only had maybe like 12 tracks. They were gonna have a 12 race season. So, okay, let's make it 24 and we'll give everybody 2 dates. That's pretty much how that goes. Yeah, the Nashville Fairgrounds would be a great, revival. I mean, I think that'd be good. Well, again, I've said this before. You have a track where they just have one date, because then each race you don't have to just vamp through what makes the place special. You can actually focus on it and say, "Oh, this is Fontana. This is outside of Los Angeles, and it's this." You don't have to come back in 4 months and then do the same thing again, or NBC doing the same thing again. I think again, that's the one thing I think that Formula One does right is they do one race at each of the tracks and they let that each location be special. And I think that's a good way to do it. I think that's the most logical way. I think that's one reason that makes the sport kind of hard to follow. It's like, oh, they're going to Pocono this. Well, Pocono's not a good example this year. Oh, they're going to Michigan this weekend. It's like, did they go to Michigan 2 months ago? It's like, well, yeah, but they're going again. It's like, is it a different length? No, it's the same length. They're going backwards around the track. It's like, no, they're going the same direction. Still Michigan. We're sure Michigan's a good track, but if you just, do they need 2 dates? They're 2 months apart. I mean, the Pocono thing is going to be hilarious. I mean, if they get one storm through there, that's going to be they're going to have to, I think they're going to at least do one of those races on Monday. I'm almost willing to bet there. I mean, they're doing it in June, so that's a good idea, but um, I don't know. I mean, probably different weather conditions. One gets shortened by fog, one gets shortened by this or that. Yeah, I mean, I would have liked it if they picked a different track to be the first doubleheader, because like the weather issues are a different deal there. Yeah. Um, and moving Daytona, the July 4th Daytona race, I didn't think we would ever not have the July race at Daytona, but I mean, moving it to what? It's the end of August, in the middle of hurricane season. It's really dumb, to be honest. I think you're gonna have some real weather problems. I mean, just thinking about what it was like at Darlington, where they were pushing that thing to be at 3 in the morning, because they knew that hurricane was coming and they couldn't push it any later. It's like, okay, let's get the heck out of here when we can. Kudos to them for getting that done. I know that was really difficult. Again, my night shift training definitely came to play, came into factor there. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, they ran out of caffeinated drinks about 1 o'clock. I think about after the end of stage two. So anybody who was in the media center there was running on vapors at that point. So I don't know how coherent my Cup Series article was for BJ McLeod that night, but that was kind of the way it went. Yeah, I'd be okay with Sears Point moving up to the spring. I know it would stink to lose a June race because my biological rhythm kind of involves June and being excited about racing coming up there. I know talking with Charlie Birch, he has the same feeling about Watkins Glen staying in August, but it is nice up here. And I talked with some other media guys about this at Fontana. It is really nice up here in the spring. I think if you have a March date, you may have some issues with rain, but they have rain tires, and if that's going to be a factor, that would probably be the time to do it. I mean, right now it's gosh, I think today I drove back here and it was what temperature is it right now? Yes. It is 68 degrees. I mean, well, it's 6:30 at night, but yeah, 68 degrees right now out here, uh, over in over here in the East Bay. We're about an hour east of the track, or hour drive east of Sonoma Raceway. So it gets a little bit cooler out there. It was probably about mid 70s earlier today, so probably low 70s there at the track. So I think that would be a good time. But yeah. I like Bristol being in the playoffs. I think that race has been overlooked too much because of the whole playoffs thing. I think the playoffs need to kind of go away quietly, but maybe that's a first step. Um, Darlington, I guess they're doing like a championship theme this year because what is it? Excuse me, Daytona is the cutoff now, so you got like Darlington is the first race of the playoffs, if I remember correctly. I mean, it's all gonna be weird this year, but that's gonna be something else. Yeah, let me look at that. Do, 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 do. Where are we? 2020 schedule. Oh, that's right. Yeah, they got the couple off weeks for the Olympics this year after New Hampshire. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, Watkins Glen's about 5 days later than it usually is. Yeah, Daytona at the end of August. That's the 26th race. Yeah, and Darlington starts the playoffs. So Darlington, Richmond, and Bristol for the first group. I mean, that's gonna be good. I mean, again, weather may be an issue because you're gonna have a whole lot in the southeast there, but I mean, that's always an issue with the playoffs. So it certainly could be. Texas, yeah, I don't know. But the 2021 schedule is gonna be interesting. We're gonna find out what that whole deal is. Interesting. Well, okay. Whew. Ooh, excuse me. Sorry, allergy season about to start. Well, before I sneeze on camera, I think I'm going to let this live stream go for now. Hope you guys enjoyed it there. Be sure to leave comment in there of any other topics you like to talk about or subjects that come up. Right now, our next scheduled live stream will be after Phoenix this Sunday, so we'll do that. But again, thank you guys for tuning in. And stay tuned to my Twitter feed at Last Car on Brock. I'll give you the first heads up there when we're doing these live streams. So you can jump in and comment. And thank you all for tuning in.